would you put as the most important issues that that could actually turn around, our Western nations, our remnants of Christendom? What are the actual political issues that political parties, or even just people in their daily lives, should be putting into practice?
Well, since you mentioned Christendom, I will give a slightly different answer to the one I would have done if you hadn't. The answer that I give most of the time is immigration, and the reason why I give that as an answer is because I view demographic revolution, which is basically what we're living through, a wholesale demographic transformation, which is unprecedented in human history. That's the case both for your country, since the Immigration Act of 1965, and in Europe for the last 20 to 30 years. I think that if there's one point I could get across on this demographic point, is that conservatives like us, we readily understand Burkean wisdom when it's applied to constitutional matters. Well, don't fiddle with that constitution because there might be all sorts of unintended consequences. You're neglecting the inherent practical accumulated wisdom that's built into long established arrangements, and you're assuming that a single mind is going to be better at grasping political reality than a whole intergenerational project, and it's therefore very unwise to tinker with an organic constitution. You might end up killing it, and everyone might be worse off as a result. So Burkean conservatives readily understand that whether we're talking about aristocratic titles or whether we're talking about the economy, that we don't want a centrally planned economy, because wisdom dispersed in the free transactions of individual agents pursuing their own interest there is in a centrally planned system, no matter how intelligent the planner is. All of this stuff that we readily understand as conservatives. Demographic revolution is much more insidious than economic revolution or constitutional revolution, because almost by definition, demographic revolutions are irreversible. The Hungarians embarked for example, because of Soviet domination, they were the victims, let's put it that way, of a very vicious social, cultural, and economic revolution from the 1950s until 1991. But the Hungarian people, at least, still existed at the end of the process, and they could assess that, and they could change things. At the end of a demographic revolution, it's irreversible because the people don't exist anymore, and it's just done. And so that's on a kind of secular basis, I view immigration as the most important issue for conservatives to wrestle with. But because you mentioned the importance of Christianity in our public life, I would say something much more like, and it ties into the immigration question as well, the need to support families and the need to encourage a boost in the birth rate. Because this goes back to what I was saying earlier. I don't think that politics can solve issues of which are fundamentally spiritual and religious and moral and cultural. I don't think, but they can make things better and they can make things worse. And using what political power we might have as conservatives to try and ensure healthy, morally ordered family formation, it is never a bad thing to be pursuing, and making sure that parents have as much in the way of parental rights over the education of their own children, rather than giving them if you're not, ask parents, if parents get about 10 to 15 minutes, if they have lots of children. I'm from a big family, I'm from a family of 6. Parents have 10, 15 minutes one-on-one time with their children each day. TikTok's getting much more time with your children than you are, and that's as true of state education as well. And there's also which is being peddled both in American schools and British schools. And so if we're talking about a kind of Christian revival, then I think that what we should be focusing on politically is pronatalism and parental rights.
Would pronatalism involve ending abortion?
Yes.
Okay.
Certainly. But the reason I didn't mention that, if I may say, sorry, the reason I didn't mention that is not because I don't hold the same view as you do, and it's because abortion is a much less salient political issue in Britain than it is in the United States. And so it's a little bit off the radar. I mean, it's not that I don't care about it. I care about it an immense deal. And I know I'm a member of the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, which is our version, I suppose, of live action. Is that your that's Lila Rose's thing in the States, live action. We have that here.
We have a lot more groups.
But
there's no one pro-life group really in America. There's a lot of them.
Yeah. Yes, but no, it's very important. But in the British context, alas, tragically, just very little political purchase, and you would not have been able to get anything like the Dobbs decision, and you wouldn't have had the Federalist Society and all of these are equivalents of the Federalist Society and the, I don't know, whatever, all of the American organizations which were angling for decades for a reversal of Roe. You wouldn't have been able to have that kind of enthusiasm going on abortion, on pro-life matters in Britain, because, and I think that's actually partly because our abortion law was passed by Parliament in the first place, and so there wasn't this feeling that it had been unjust. It was, you know, legalized by a judicial backdoor in the case of Roe in very dubious constitutional circumstances. It actually, there was the feeling of injustice on the part of American conservatives, as well as their greater Christian commitment, made it more important for the evangelical and other conservative movements in America than it is here. So that's why I didn't mention it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. You keep separating sort of secular and religious, which, I mean, they're there for those distinctions, of course. But from what I understand, the reason secular even exists in the world is because the church, the Catholic Church, basically had two sets of sort of levels to society. One was the clerical, and one was the secular. But the secular didn't actually involve any less religion. So how is religion not part of the secular domain? I mean, you even live in a country with a state religion.
Absolutely. And when I use the word secular, I don't mean thereby religious commitments or religious perspectives on the secular are therefore discounted at the outset. I think that you're right today, that there is a misunderstanding of that. The word secular as meaning explicitly non-religious, or we have a neutral, secular, liberal public square in which a religion is sort of cordoned off to the margins of private life. When I use the word secular, I think it's impossible to engage in what I'm calling what is properly understood as secular politics without an understanding of the sacred. But keeping them separate is also important. Otherwise, you're going to be liable to thinking that politics itself is a kind of sacred pursuit. And I would say that I don't think politics is a sacred pursuit. I think it is a pursuit which can be informed by an understanding of the sacred, but it is precisely the sacred that keeps the secular secular. And we're dealing with fallen creatures here, and the political realm is not going to be sacred in the way that in the way that the church isn't going to be sacred either all of the time, or its hierarchy isn't going to be. You know what I mean? There is a proper distinction between.
You mean the physical? You mean the people within the church, not the church itself, right?
That's exactly what I mean. Yes.
Okay. Just good to get those distinctions. Well, the reason I mentioned this is secular, because to me it seemed when I asked the question about what we should be doing, you separated the two into sort of immigration and pronatalist policies into basically two categories, which to me, I thought you were using secular to meaning using secular the way I was thinking you were using it. That's the reason I asked that.
Let me clarify then. I view immigration as an issue which should be approached from a Christian perspective. And one of the pieces of which I'm most proud, because I spent ages writing it and I felt it was thoroughly important, was one called "Can a Christian Care About Demographics?" Because there is this belief that, well, if we're Christians, is it are we allowed to, care more for our own people as opposed to other people? Is this not? Are we not neglecting our duties to the stranger? And there's a lot. I find personally that there's a lot of complacency in Christian circles on the question of immigration. So I wanted to, and I'm perfectly happy to engage on that issue in a Christian context. And my answer to the question, can a Christian care about demographics, was yes. And I made both a theological and a biblical argument for that. The reason why I separated them out on that particular, because I don't, when I mentioned, the secular matter of immigration, and then you've got the more, when we're talking about Christendom, I would emphasize pronatalism and, of course, pro-life activism and parental choice in education. The reason why I separate, because immigration is much less obviously a question with a bearing, which Christianity can inform in most people's minds, because it's usually debated in terms that are either concerning to some modern day Christians, or it's debated in logistical terms about net fiscal contributions and all that. But obviously all of this is, I think that an understanding of moral life, a collective understanding of moral life, is always going to supervene all of our pragmatic and practical discussions, including about pensions. I never think that religion should be, I don't think it's possible for religion ever to be completely out of the picture. But it's less obvious in the case of immigration. And I also encounter a lot of Christians, and I really don't like this. I encounter a lot of Christians who will say things like, well, the Catholic Church is really suffering in Britain because, white British people aren't going to church. So we just import loads of Rwandans and Filipinos. And it's like, if you're doing that, and this is the point I make in my piece, because a lot of Christians are in favor of lots of immigration precisely because they have this idea that it reinvigorates communities and this idea that it actually makes us a more religious culture. I don't think it makes us a more religious culture. I think it replaces our culture with a different religious culture. I think that's what it's doing. And I think that the Great Commission in Matthew is to make disciples of all nations. It's not replace increasingly paganizing nations with less pagan nations. That's not what it says.
Yeah, it's not to bring all nations to make one nation. Yeah.
That's another reason why I think. Am I still muted?
No, you're good. Sorry.
That's another reason why I kept them a little bit separate, is because I in the back of my mind I had this. There is this. I don't think. Put it this way. If we avert this demographic crisis, this demographic revolution, this demographic transformation, if we avert it, I don't think that automatically brings Christendom back. And that was the framing of the question. I think that there's another fight to have, but I certainly don't think that it's a Christian thing to effectively replace, and this is a bit of a controversial term, but I think it's legitimate and I think it's accurate. I don't think it's a Christian to replace a settled people with another people without their consent, and they'd be mad to give their consent as well, which is another consideration.
Is it kind of like repelling an invasion? Yes, we need to be doing all the religious, worship of God, true religion. We need to be a Christian people, but at the same time, there's an army at the gates, and we need to take care of that problem as well.
Absolutely. And the other thing as well, is in a way, it's not worse in terms of blood and in terms of bloodshed as armed conquest, but I call it, I like to call it unarmed demographic conquest. And one of the reasons why that's more insidious, even though it's less bloody, is because when there's a full-on army, an actual army outside the gates, then presumably your own political elite might be on your side in wanting to fight them. But when it's happening through an insidious...
Sorry, I just want to add that that's a presumption that I don't think you can have in any of our countries these days. Like,
there is that there is that consideration. Maybe they're so venal they wouldn't even be willing to fight that. But there's still an understanding. I mean, I suspect if Putin were to, I don't think he ever would, but if Putin were to try and launch an invasion of Britain, I do think that you would get, or even Pakistan, if you want to make it a non-white country, would do something like that in Britain. I think you'd still. I think the clamour for repelling the invasion would be so irresistible that even if they didn't really believe in it, the elites would probably agree to fight it. But but when it's unarmed demographic conquest, and the consequences are not immediately obvious. It's not like the Vikings were at the gate or whatever it might be. I think, and also you get venal business elites as well who are very much on board with mass immigration, precisely because it lowers labor costs. And then you've got political elites which are on board with mass immigration, particularly left-wing political elites, because it gives them a mass clientele class of easy votes on the part of minorities if you can enfranchise them and promise them endless welfare, and you can promise to act on their behalf, and and so it's a sort of combination that what replacement migration. I don't think it's all planned in some room by some cabal, and still less the result of a single guiding intelligence. But what you get is a congruence of interests which converge onto the same space from different starting points. And I think the main ones are sort of neoliberal economic neoliberals on the right who want those cheap labor costs and who want to grow the pie of GDP without really caring too much about communities or GDP per capita and prospect. And they certainly don't care about the idea that the host nation has any say in this sort of thing. And then on the other hand, you have the left-wing political elites which want an unending stream of free votes to prop up their otherwise very unpopular race communist agenda, frankly.
Yeah, well, I think that's what we have time for today. Harrison, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I have all the links to your work and to your other shows in the description. So I encourage all of you listening, watching, to go see Harrison's other content at the European Conservative, at the New Culture Forum, as well as his episodes that he's been on at thelotuseaters.com. So, Harrison, thank you.
Connor, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
For everyone watching, please like, share, comment, and subscribe if you liked the content. I will also be doing an episode on Sir Gawain and the Green Knight on Saturday to participate in King Arthur's Day. That Nathan Hood's channel is that he put together. So thank you, everyone, and God bless. Bye, everyone.